She knew they were going to die. It wasn't a maybe. It wasn't a possibility. It was a cold, hard fact, as sharp and real as the ice crystals forming on her eyelashes. The wind on the Kansas prairie didn't just howl, it screamed, a raw, hungry sound that promised to strip the flesh from your bones and scatter the dust that remained. Mary and Hartley pulled a threadbare shawl tighter, a useless gesture. The cold had already sunk its teeth deep into her, but it was the little body pressed against her chest she cared about. 3-year-old Thomas. Her Thomas. He'd stopped whimpering an hour ago. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. She whispered promises into his hair, words about warmth and food that tasted like lies on her cracked lips. Mama's going to find us somewhere warm, sweet boy. But where? The town of Cedar Ridge was 5 miles of frozen hell behind them. Every door had been shut in her face. The eviction notice from Mr. Garrett had been the final nail in the coffin of their old life. He'd stood there, spitting tobacco juice into the snow, his eyes like chips of flint as she packed their world into a single carpet bag. "You've got till noon," he'd said. That was 6 hours ago, an entire lifetime ago. Now her pride was just a foolish memory. Her husband Samuel had been gone 10 weeks, his chest crushed in a railroad accident. She'd buried him with the last of their savings, never imagining how fast the world would turn on a widow and her child. Her feet were numb. Each step was a battle of will against a body that had already surrendered. The world was a swirling vortex of white, and the only thing real was the chilling silence of her son. A silence that meant his small body was shutting down. She had to do something. Now. She stumbled, her knee hitting something hard beneath the snow. A fence post. Her numb fingers clawed at the wood. A fence meant property. Property meant a house. A house meant life. "Hello!" The word was a pathetic croak, stolen by the wind. She tried again, screaming this time. "Please, help us!" She followed the fence line, tripping, falling, getting up again. Her own survival was an afterthought. It was all for Thomas. And that's when she saw it. A faint glow through the blizzard. A single, solitary light. A lamp in a window. It was like seeing an angel in the middle of hell. She staggered toward it, tears freezing on her cheeks. The shape of a house grew out of the storm, solid and real. She fell against the door, pounding with fists she couldn't feel. "Please, my son! He's freezing! Please!" For a long, terrible moment, there was nothing. Just the shriek of the wind. Then she heard it. Heavy footsteps. The sound of a bolt being drawn. The door opened a crack, spilling a sliver of golden light onto the snow. A man's face appeared in the gap. Weathered, hard, with eyes the color of a winter sky. He looked at her, then at the bundle in her arms. Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't pity, it wasn't kindness. It was something else entirely, something she couldn't read. Without a word, he pulled the door wide. "Get in," he said, his voice a low growl. "Quick, before you bring the whole damn storm in with you." She stumbled across the threshold and the world went black. James McGrath caught the woman as her legs gave out. She was lighter than a sack of feed, her body trembling violently. He guided her to a chair by the hearth, the one that had sat empty for 5 long years. She was still clutching the boy, a fierce, protective grip that even unconsciousness couldn't break. He pried the child from her arms gently. The boy, maybe 3 or 4, was terrifyingly still. His skin had a pale, waxy sheen. James had seen it before. He was close to the edge. He laid the boy on the rug before the fire, unwrapping the layers of rags in a single worn quilt. He checked the child's fingers and toes. They were white and hard. Frostbite. Bad. He worked quickly, his hands moving with a grim efficiency born of lonely winters and hard-learned lessons. He chafed the boy's limbs, not too hard, just enough to get the blood moving. The woman on the chair began to stir, moaning softly. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with panic. "Thomas? He's here. He's alive," James said, his voice rougher than he intended. "But you almost waited too long." She tried to get up, but he pushed her gently back into the chair. "Stay put. You're no good to him half frozen." He fetched blankets, wrapping one around her shoulders and tucking another around the boy. He put a kettle on the stove, the simple domestic act feeling foreign after so many years of silence. The house was always quiet, He preferred it that way. Silence couldn't betray you. Silence couldn't die and leave you hollowed out. Tonight, though, the silence was broken by the woman's chattering teeth and the hiss of the storm outside. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'm Mary Ellen Hartley. This is Thomas." "James McGrath," he replied, not offering more. He brought her a mug of hot, sweet tea. She cupped it in trembling hands, the warmth a painful shock to her frozen fingers. "We won't trouble you long," she said, reciting the lines of the desperate, "just until the storm passes." James looked at her worn-out boots, the patches on her dress, the stark hunger in her eyes. She had nowhere to go. He knew it. She knew it. But the dance had to be performed. "Storm's not letting up anytime soon," he said, turning to look out the window at the swirling chaos. "Could be days." He watched her from the corner of his eye. She was young, maybe 27, with fine features hidden beneath layers of exhaustion and grime. He could see the ghost of a pretty woman, the kind who would have had suitors and dreams before life had beaten them out of her. He felt a familiar, unwelcome pang in his chest. He'd built this ranch with his wife, Martha. Built it for a family they never had. After diphtheria took her, the 8 rooms had become a mausoleum, each one echoing with the ghosts of what might have been. He'd learned to live with the ghosts. He'd learned to prefer them to the living. Until now. The woman, Mary Ellen, finally managed to get to her feet and knelt beside her son. She stroked his hair, whispering his name. The boy's eyelids flickered. "Mama?" His voice was a thread of sound. Relief washed over Mary Ellen's face so intensely it was painful to watch. James turned away, busying himself by adding more wood to the fire. He couldn't afford to feel anything for these people. They were a temporary problem, a disruption to his carefully ordered solitude. That night he gave them the upstairs guest room, Martha's sewing room. He laid out fresh linens on the bed, a task his hands hadn't performed in 5 years. As he carried the sleeping boy upstairs, the child's small head lolled against his shoulder. The unexpected weight, the innocent trust of it, sent a jolt through him. He deposited the boy on the bed and retreated as Mary Ellen murmured her thanks. He went back downstairs and sat in his chair listening. He could hear her moving around softly overhead. The creak of the floorboards, the whisper of cloth, the sounds of life in a house that had been dead for too long. He should have hated it. He should have resented the intrusion. But as he stared into the flames, a different feeling crept in. A cold dread that had nothing to do with the storm. These people were a complication, and he already had more complications than any man could handle. He got up and walked to the front door. He slid the heavy iron bolt into place. Then he went to the back door and did the same. It wasn't to keep the storm out. It was to keep them in. They thought they had found a refuge, a safe harbor from the storm. They had no idea what kind of place they had stumbled into, and they had no idea who or what they were locked in with. The storm raged for 2 more days. 2 days of being trapped in the silent, imposing house with a man who spoke in clipped sentences and watched her with an unnerving intensity. Mary Ellen tried to make herself useful. She cooked and cleaned, scrubbing away the years of dust and neglect that clung to every surface. The house was solid, well built, but it felt sad, as if it were holding its breath. She was living in a ghost's home, Martha's home. The presence of the first wife was everywhere, in the faded curtains she mended, in the spice tins she used, in the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the linens in the chest upstairs. James McGrath was a puzzle. He worked from dawn till dusk, his movements efficient and tireless. He tended his livestock with a gentle hand that seemed at odds with his gruff demeanor. He was kind to Thomas, even carving him a small wooden horse one evening, but his kindness was distant, impersonal. He would watch them, his winter blue eyes revealing nothing. Mary Ellen felt less like a guest and more like a specimen under a microscope. On the second night, she found the courage to ask him about his wife. "It must have been hard," she said softly, darning one of his socks by the fire. "Losing her out here." "Everyone loses someone," he said, not looking up from the harness he was repairing. The finality in his tone shut down the conversation. But Mary Ellen had seen the flicker of pain in his eyes. This was a man drowning in grief, and he had built walls of solitude around himself to keep from going under. The town, Cedar Ridge, seemed a world away. She wondered what they would say if they knew she was here. The widow Hartley shacked up with the recluse McGrath. The gossip would be vicious, but gossip was a luxury for people with full bellies and warm beds. On the third morning, the wind finally died down. The sun emerged, glittering on a world transformed, buried under a thick blanket of white. "Roads will be impassable for another day or two," James announced at breakfast, "but the worst is over." Mary Ellen's heart sank. The reprieve was ending. Soon she would have to take Thomas and step back out into that cold, unforgiving world. The thought was unbearable. Where would they go? What would they do? Her desperate plan to get to Denver seemed like a child's fantasy now. That afternoon, while Thomas napped, James found her in the kitchen, staring out at the endless snow. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stood beside her, looking out at the same blank canvas. "It's a hard land," he said finally. "It takes more than it gives." "I know," she whispered. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You can't go back out there. You and the boy. You won't make it." "We have to," she said, her voice trembling. "We have no choice." "There's always a choice," he said. His gaze was so intense it felt like a physical weight. "I need help. This ranch. It's too much for one man. The house needs a woman's hand. I'm getting older." Mary Ellen stared at him, her mind refusing to process where this was going. "Mr. McGrath, I'm grateful for your shelter, but I can't stay on as your housekeeper. I have no money to pay you." "I'm not talking about wages," he cut in. The air in the kitchen grew thick, heavy. "I'm proposing marriage." The words dropped into the silence like stones into a frozen lake. Mary Ellen felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "A practical arrangement," he continued, his voice steady, as if he were discussing the price of cattle. "You need a home, security for your son. I need a wife, a partner to help run this place. It makes sense." "Sense?" she choked out. "We're strangers. I've known you for 3 days." "I knew Martha for 6 months," he said, a bitter edge to his voice. "Didn't make the loss any easier. This isn't about love, Mrs. Hartley. I'm not offering romance. I'm offering survival. You'd be Mrs. McGrath. This would be your home. Thomas would be my heir. No one would ever throw you out in the snow again." She backed away, shaking her head. "No, I can't. It's unthinkable." "Is it more unthinkable than your son freezing to death on the prairie?" He shot back. The brutal truth of his words hit her like a slap. "Why?" she whispered, searching his face for some sign of madness, of trickery. "Why me? A destitute widow with a child?" He hesitated, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his stony facade, a flicker of something that looked like desperation. "Because I can't do this alone anymore," he admitted, his voice dropping. "And because you, of all people, understand what it's like to have everything taken from you." But there was another reason, one he wasn't sharing. She could feel it, a dark undercurrent beneath the practical surface of his offer. It was in the way he'd bolted the doors that first night. It was in the way he always seemed to be watching, waiting. This wasn't just about loneliness. He was afraid of something. "There's more to it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Isn't there?" James looked away, his jaw tight. "Garrett," he said, the name like a curse. "Your old landlord. He's not a good man. He has interests out this way. It's not safe for a woman alone." It was a lie, a partial one at least, but it was all he could give her. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. He couldn't tell her that Garrett's interests were buried somewhere on this very ranch. He couldn't tell her that her own late husband, Samuel, was connected to it all. And he certainly couldn't tell her that his first wife, Martha, hadn't died of diphtheria. He was almost certain she had been murdered. And he had a terrible suspicion that marrying Mary Ellen Hartley, for reasons he didn't yet understand, was either the key to proving it or the biggest mistake of his life. "Marry me, Mary Ellen," he said, his voice softer now. "Let me protect you and the boy." He was offering her a cage, gilded with security and warmth, but it was a cage nonetheless. She looked out the window at the blinding snow, then back at this hard, mysterious man. A marriage of convenience, a partnership for survival. Or was it something far more dangerous? She looked at his eyes and saw the truth he was trying to hide. He wasn't offering to protect her from the world. He was offering to protect her from a secret that had already killed once. She said yes. The word felt like a betrayal on her tongue, a betrayal of Samuel, of love, of every dream she'd ever had. But when she looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in the other room, she knew it wasn't a choice, it was a surrender. They rode to town 2 days later, the sleigh gliding over the packed snow. The world was clean and bright, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. Thomas sat between them, a chattering, innocent buffer against the suffocating silence. James hadn't touched her. He hadn't offered a single word of comfort or affection. This was a business transaction, and he was treating it as such. Cedar Ridge was a shock to the system. After the isolation of the ranch, the sight of other people, the noise, the smells, felt overwhelming. And the stairs. Oh, the stairs. News, it seemed, traveled faster than a horse in these parts. As James hitched the sleigh in front of the parsonage, every curtain on the street twitched. Every passerby slowed their step. Mary Ellen felt her face burn with shame. The widow Hartley, not 3 months in mourning, marrying the town recluse. They would call her a whore, a gold digger. Reverend Caldwell's face was a mask of polite disapproval. His wife, a woman with a sour, pinched face, looked at Mary Ellen as if she were something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "This is sudden, James," the Reverend said, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Hartley, are you certain about this? You are under no duress?" Mary Ellen looked at James, who stood rigid as a statue by the door. Duress? She was swimming in it. "I am certain, Reverend," she said, her voice clear and cold. "Mr. McGrath has offered me and my son a home. It is a practical arrangement." The ceremony was a blur of hollow words and judgmental eyes. The Reverend's wife and the feed store owner stood as witnesses, their expressions grim. James produced a ring, a simple worn gold band. As he slid it onto her finger, she realized with a sickening lurch that it must have been Martha's. It was loose, a constant, cold reminder of the dead woman whose life she was stealing. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The words sealed her fate. She was no longer Mary Ellen Hartley. She was Mrs. McGrath, the property of a stranger. Their first stop as a married couple was the general store. The whispers stopped the moment they walked in. The air crackled with unspoken condemnation. "My wife needs some things," James announced to the proprietor, his voice daring anyone to challenge the word. "Fabric, boots for the boy, whatever she requires." He was buying her a new life, a new identity. She moved through the store in a daze, picking out wool for a winter dress, sturdy cottons, a new pair of boots. James added items without asking. A slate for Thomas, a length of deep blue silk, a warm coat for her. He was dressing the part of the dutiful husband, playing a role for the town's benefit. When he paid the bill, a small fortune, without flinching, she felt the weight of the debt settle on her. She was bought and paid for. The ride home was even more silent than the ride in. As the ranch came into view, a wave of despair washed over her. This was her prison, a comfortable, warm prison, but a prison all the same. That night he showed her to her new room. It was across the hall from his. "You'll have your privacy," he said, his tone flat, "as we agreed." He didn't even wish her a good night. He just closed the door, leaving her alone in the unfamiliar room. She sat on the edge of the bed, Martha's ring cold on her finger, and for the first time since Samuel's death, she allowed herself to cry. She wept for her lost husband, for her lost freedom, for the woman she used to be. The next few weeks passed in a monotonous rhythm. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended, she taught Thomas his letters. She was a ghost in a ghost house, and her new husband was a shadow. They shared meals in near silence, their conversation limited to the practicalities of the ranch. But she watched him. She saw the way he checked the horizon every evening before bolting the doors. She saw the rifle that was never far from his hand. He was a man living on a razor's edge. He wasn't just grieving, he was afraid. One rainy afternoon, driven by a desperate need to understand the house she now inhabited, she started exploring. In the attic, covered in a dusty canvas sheet, was a large wooden trunk. Martha's trunk. Her hands trembled as she lifted the heavy lid. It was filled with a life packed away. Dresses, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, a child's silver rattle. And at the very bottom, tucked beneath a wedding veil, was a small, leather-bound diary. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was an invasion, a desecration. But she couldn't stop herself. She had to know. Who was the woman whose life she had taken? She opened the diary. Martha's handwriting was a neat, elegant script. The early entries were full of hope and love for her new husband, James, and their plans for the ranch. But as the months went on, the tone began to change. A new name appeared on the pages. Samuel. Samuel Hartley. Her, Samuel. He'd taken a job as a hired hand on a neighboring ranch. Martha wrote about his charm, his easy smile. Then the entries grew more sporadic, more fearful. He watches the house. He and that other one, Garrett. They are looking for something. James doesn't see it. He thinks I'm imagining things. Mary Ellen's blood ran cold. She flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. The last entry was dated 2 days before Martha's supposed death from diphtheria. The ink was smudged, as if written in great haste. They know I saw them. Near the old oak by the creek. S and G, they were digging. I confronted Samuel. He laughed at me. He said things. Terrible things. He said this land held a secret worth killing for. I have to tell James. I have to make him believe me before it's too late. It was the last thing she ever wrote. Mary Ellen slammed the diary shut, a strangled cry escaping her lips. It was a lie. All of it. Her marriage, Samuel's goodness, Martha's death. Her sainted husband wasn't a victim. He was a monster, a thief and a conspirator. And James. James knew. He must have found the diary. That's why he married her. But why? What did he think she knew? Suddenly a memory surfaced. A conversation with Samuel just before he'd left for that final railroad job. He'd given her their worn carpet bag. No matter what happens, Mary, you keep this safe. There's more to it than meets the eye. It's our future. With trembling fingers, she ran to her room and tore the carpet bag from the wardrobe. She felt along the seams, the worn fabric. Her fingers found it, a lump in the stitching of the bottom lining. She ripped the seam open with her teeth. A small, oilskin-wrapped packet fell out. Inside was a piece of paper. It was a map, a crudely drawn map of the McGrath Ranch. And on it, in Samuel's familiar scrawl, was a large X marking a spot near an old oak tree by the creek. The world tilted on its axis. Samuel hadn't just been a conspirator. He'd been the architect, and he had left her the key. James hadn't married her for convenience or protection. He had married her because he believed she knew where the secret was buried. She wasn't his wife. She was his prisoner, and she was the only living person who knew the location of a secret worth killing for. A secret that had already claimed one life and was now coming for hers. The map felt like a hot coal in her hand, a testament to her husband's betrayal and her own staggering ignorance. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. James. He had to know. He must have suspected something, found the diary after Martha's death, put the pieces together. His marriage proposal wasn't an act of kindness. It was a strategic move. He was keeping his enemy's widow close, waiting for her to lead him to the prize. The thought made her feel sick, used, a fool. She hid the map and the diary back in their places, her mind racing. What was she going to do? She was trapped. If she confronted James, what would he do? If Garrett found out she had the map, he would kill her without a second thought. She was surrounded by predators, and her only shield was her silence. She had to play the part of the dutiful, ignorant wife. Her life and Thomas's depended on it. A change came over her. The despair was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't the fragile widow anymore. She was a survivor, and she would do whatever it took to protect her son. She started watching James as closely as he watched her. She observed his routines, the way he patrolled the property line every evening, the tension in his shoulders when a rider appeared in the distance. He was a man under siege, and he'd brought her inside the fortress walls thinking she was an asset. She would have to become one. She asked him to teach her to shoot the rifle, A woman should know how to defend her home, she said, her voice steady. He looked at her, surprised but agreed. He took her out behind the barn and showed her how to load, aim, and fire. The kick of the rifle against her shoulder was a brutal, empowering shock. She was a quick learner. "You've got a good eye," he said, a note of respect in his voice. "Samuel taught me," she replied, the lie tasting like ash. Days turned into weeks. The false spring gave way to the real thing. The prairie bloomed with wildflowers, a beautiful, deceptive mask over the ugliness that lay beneath. The tension in the house was a living thing, a coiled snake in the center of the room. They circled each other, two wary opponents, each waiting for the other to make a move. The love she'd thought she was seeing in his eyes now looked like calculation. The kindness he showed Thomas seemed like a tactic to win her trust. The first move came not from within the house, but from outside. It was a moonless night. The dogs started barking, a frantic, savage sound. James was out of his bed in an instant, rifle in hand. "Stay in your room. Bar the door," he ordered. Mary Ellen did as she was told, her heart hammering. She herded a sleepy Thomas into the wardrobe, whispering for him to be quiet. She grabbed the shotgun from above her own fireplace, a weapon James had insisted she keep, and crept to the window. She could see them in the faint starlight. Three riders moving quietly toward the creek bed, toward the old oak tree. They were carrying shovels. Garrett. He was done waiting. He was coming for his prize. A shot rang out from the darkness near the barn. James's warning shot. The riders scattered, taking cover. "Garrett!" James's voice boomed across the yard. "I know it's you! Get off my land!" Garrett's ugly laughter echoed back. "This ain't your land anymore, McGrath. It belongs to the man with the map. And I'm thinking your pretty new wife knows right where it is." Mary Ellen's blood froze. He knew. How could he know? "Leave her out of this," James roared. "This is between you and me." "Oh, I think she's right in the middle of it," Garrett taunted. "Send her out, McGrath. Send out the widow Hartley with what her thieving husband left her, and maybe I'll let you and the boy live." The threat was clear. They were trapped. Garrett's men started firing toward the house, the bullets thudding into the thick log walls. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was an attack. James was pinned down in the barn. She and Thomas were alone in the house. Garrett thought she was a helpless woman, a bargaining chip. He was about to find out how wrong he was. She took a deep breath, the smell of gunpowder already in the air. She checked the load on the shotgun. 2 barrels, 2 chances. She moved to the back of the house, to the window that overlooked the creek. She could see one of Garrett's men creeping toward the oak tree, using the darkness as cover. He thought no one could see him. She rested the barrel of the shotgun on the windowsill, took aim, and squeezed the trigger. The blast shattered the night silence, a deafening roar that ripped through the air. The man screamed and fell, clutching his leg. One down. The other men started firing wildly at the house. Splinters flew from the window frame near her head. She ducked down, her heart pounding, and reloaded. She wasn't just defending her home anymore. She was fighting for her life against her dead husband's legacy of greed. The front door burst open. James was there, his face grim in the moonlight. "I saw your shot. You all right?" "He knows about the map," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "How?" "It doesn't matter now. We have to hold them off until dawn. The sheriff makes his rounds at sunrise." He looked at her, at the shotgun in her hands, at the determined set of her jaw. The suspicion in his eyes was replaced by something else, a grudging admiration. "You stay here. Keep the windows covered. I'm going to try and circle around behind them." "No," she said. "We do this together." He started to argue, then stopped. He saw the same cold resolve in her eyes that he felt in his own gut. He nodded once. "All right, together." In that moment, something shifted between them. They were no longer jailer and prisoner, no longer deceiver and deceived. They were partners, allies bound not by a false marriage certificate, but by a shared, desperate fight for survival. The battle for the McGrath Ranch had begun, and buried somewhere out there in the darkness was a secret that would either set them free or get them both killed. The night became a terrifying symphony of chaos. Gunshots echoed in the darkness. punctuated by the splintering of wood and the panicked whinnying of horses. Mary Ellen and James moved through the house like ghosts, firing from different windows, creating the illusion that there were more than two of them. They were a surprisingly effective team. He would call out targets, and she would lay down covering fire. Her fear had been burned away, replaced by a white-hot, focused rage. These men, led by her dead husband's partner, were trying to destroy the one safe place her son had ever known. She would not let that happen. "They're trying to set fire to the barn," James yelled, pointing to a flickering light. One of Garrett's men was creeping toward the structure with a torch. All their hay, their livestock, their future was in that barn. Without thinking, Mary Ellen raised her rifle, found the man in her sights, and fired. The torch flew through the air and sputtered out in the damp grass. The man scrambled back into the darkness. James gave her a quick, appreciative nod. "Good shooting. You're not the only one with things to protect," she said, reloading with steady hands. The hours crawled by. The initial assault had failed, and now Garrett and his men had settled in for a siege, taking pot shots at the house, trying to wear them down. Inside, the tension was thick enough to taste. Thomas was still huddled in the wardrobe, whimpering softly. Every gunshot made Mary Ellen flinch, not for herself, but for him. During a lull in the fighting, James moved to her side. "The map," he said, his voice low. "It's real then. You have it." It wasn't a question. She looked him straight in the eye. "Yes. And the diary?" "I have that too," she said, her voice defiant. "I know what Samuel and Garrett were, and I know what they did to your wife." A muscle jumped in his jaw. The grief and rage he'd kept bottled up for 5 years surfaced in his eyes. "I found it after she passed. I read her last words. I knew it wasn't diphtheria. I knew, but I couldn't prove it. The sheriff thought I was a grieving husband gone mad." "And Samuel," she whispered, "he disappeared right after. I heard he'd signed on with the railroad. I figured he was running. Then I heard he died. I thought the secret died with him, until you showed up." His voice was heavy with bitterness. "I saw your name on the church register when you buried him. Hartley. I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. I thought you were in on it with him. I married you to keep you here, to force your hand, to find out what you knew." The confession hung in the air between them, the ugly, painful truth. He had used her, but he had also inadvertently saved her. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear to you, James, I thought he was a good man. I had no idea." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not a conspirator, but another victim of Samuel Hartley's lies. "I believe you," he said quietly. Another volley of shots from outside cut the conversation short. "We can sort this out later," James said, his voice all business again, "if we live through this." Just as he spoke, a bullet smashed through the window and ricocheted off the stone fireplace. It struck the oil lamp on the mantelpiece. The lamp shattered, spilling burning oil onto the dry wooden floor. Flames erupted, climbing the curtains with terrifying speed. The house was on fire. "Get Thomas!" James yelled, grabbing a heavy rug to try and beat back the flames. Mary Ellen ran to the bedroom, coughing as thick, black smoke filled the hallway. She pulled a terrified Thomas from the wardrobe. "It's okay, baby, we're going outside now." The fire was spreading. The main room was an inferno. The front door was blocked by a wall of flame. "The cellar!" James shouted over the roar. He kicked open the trap door in the kitchen floor and helped her and Thomas down the narrow steps into the cool, damp darkness below. He slammed the door shut just as the floor above them began to groaning. They were trapped. The smoke was already seeping through the floorboards. They were trading a quick death by bullet for a slow one by suffocation. Garrett's men were outside. The fire was above. There was no way out. "There's a tunnel," James said, his voice strained from the smoke. "Martha's father was paranoid about raids. It leads out to the creek bed. It hasn't been opened in 30 years. He felt along the stone wall in the darkness, his hands searching for the release mechanism. Come on," he muttered. Mary Ellen held Thomas close, trying to shield him from the smoke, her own lungs burning. The roar of the fire above was growing louder. The whole house was going to come down on top of them. James gave a triumphant grunt. A section of the stone wall scraped open, revealing a black, narrow opening. "Go!" he urged. "I'll be right behind you." Mary Ellen didn't hesitate. She pushed Thomas ahead of her into the musty, spiderweb-filled tunnel and scrambled in after him. James followed, pulling the stone door shut behind them. They were plunged into absolute blackness, the roar of the fire muffled. They crawled on their hands and knees, the air thin and stale. It felt like being buried alive. After what seemed like an eternity, she saw it. A faint circle of gray light ahead. The exit. They burst out into the pre-dawn air, gasping, their faces black with soot. They were 50 yards from the house, hidden by the high bank of the creek. The entire ranch house was engulfed in flames, a funeral pyre lighting up the morning sky. Garrett and his men were standing in the yard, watching it burn, their faces illuminated by the destructive glow. They thought they had won. They thought they had killed them all. "They'll go for the oak tree now," James whispered, his voice hoarse. "They think we're dead. They think there's nothing to stop them." He looked at Mary Ellen, his face a grim mask of determination. "It ends now. Right now." He still had his rifle. She had managed to keep hold of the shotgun. It wasn't over yet. They crept along the creek bed, using the bank for cover, moving toward the old oak tree where Garrett's men were already starting to dig, their greed making them careless. Mary Ellen looked at James, at this man she had married out of desperation, this man she had feared and hated. And in the fiery dawn, she saw him for what he was. A man who had lost everything, fighting to protect the last remnants of his life. Just like her. "Give me the map," James whispered. She reached into her dress, pulled out the oilskin packet and handed it to him. He was no longer her jailer. He was her partner. They were going to end this together. They had lost the house, but they would not lose the war. They reached the oak tree just as the first rays of sun crested the horizon. The light filtered through the leaves, casting long shadows on the ground where Garrett and his remaining man were digging frantically. The man Mary Ellen had shot in the leg was propped against the tree, groaning, a pistol resting in his lap. "Hurry up," Garrett snarled, sweat beading on his forehead. "The whole county will be here soon." "Found something," his man grunted. He pulled a heavy iron-strapped box from the shallow hole. Garrett let out a whoop of triumph, his face greedy in the morning light. "Finally, after all these years." He fumbled with the latch, prying the box open. It was filled with bundles of cash and gold coins, the stolen railroad payroll. "We're rich," Garrett crowed. "Now you listen to me." James's voice cut through the air, cold and deadly. "You're under arrest." Garrett and his men froze, spinning around. James and Mary Ellen stepped out from behind the creek bank, their weapons leveled. Garrett's surprise quickly turned into a sneer. "McGraw, I should have known you were too stubborn to burn." His eyes flickered to the box of money, then back to them. "There's only two of you. You really think you can stop us?" "We can," a new voice said. Sheriff Morrison and two deputies stepped out from the trees on the other side of the clearing, their own rifles aimed. "I got your message last night, James. Wrote as soon as it was light enough to see the smoke." Garrett's face fell. He was trapped, but he wasn't going down without a fight. In one swift movement, he grabbed the wounded man's pistol and shoved the man toward the deputies. "Get him!" he screamed, diving for the cover of the oak tree. The world exploded into gunfire. The deputies took down the man who was digging. The wounded man on the ground raised his pistol, but Mary Ellen didn't hesitate. She fired the shotgun, the blast echoing through the woods. The man went still. All that was left was Garrett. He was firing wildly from behind the tree, keeping them all pinned down. "You'll never take me alive, McGrath," he shrieked. "This money is mine." "It was never yours, Garrett," James yelled back. "Just like Martha was never yours to kill." "She was a snooping bitch. She got what she deserved." Garrett screamed, confirming everything James had suspected. "She saw me and Samuel bury the loot. She was going to tell you. I couldn't let that happen." He fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt near James's feet. "And Samuel?" Mary Ellen screamed, her voice filled with anguish. "What happened to my husband?" Garrett let out a cackle. "Your husband was a weak-willed fool. He wanted to go back, confess everything. Said he couldn't live with what we did to Martha. I told him the railroad was a dangerous place. Accidents happen. The final piece fell into place. Garrett hadn't just killed Martha. He'd murdered Samuel, too. Her whole life had been a lie, built on the crimes of a man she never really knew. Fueled by a fresh wave of rage, Mary Ellen started moving, circling to the left while James and the sheriff laid down covering fire. Garrett was focused on them, not seeing her creep through the underbrush. She found her angle. She could see him crouch behind the tree, reloading his pistol. She raised her rifle. This was for Martha. This was for the life Samuel had stolen from her. This was for Thomas. She fired. Garrett cried out and slumped to the ground, his pistol clattering on the rocks. It was over. A deafening silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the chirping of birds and the distant crackle of the burning house. Sheriff Morrison and his deputies moved in, securing a wounded but alive Garrett. James walked over to Mary Ellen, his face etched with exhaustion and relief. He looked at the smoking ruin of his home, the culmination of his life's work, now just a pile of ash. "I'm sorry, James," she said softly. "You're home." He shook his head, his eyes finding hers. "A house is just wood and nails. We can rebuild that. We're alive. Thomas is safe. That's all that matters." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was no longer that of a stranger or a jailer. It was warm, firm, and grounding. They had been through the fire together, literally, and had come out the other side. The secrets that had stood between them were burned away with the house. The sheriff approached them, tipping his hat. "You two make quite a team. That was some of the bravest damn foolishness I've ever seen." He looked at the box of money. "The railroad will be mighty pleased to get this back. There's a substantial reward." "Use it to rebuild," Mary Ellen said to James. He squeezed her hand. "We'll use it to rebuild," he corrected her. "Our home." As the deputies hauled Garrett away, Mary Ellen looked at the spot where her husband's dream of wealth lay exposed. It had brought nothing but death and misery. Then she looked at James, at his soot-stained face and kind eyes, and at Thomas, who was running toward them from where he'd been hiding with a deputy. This was real. This was her future. A future born not from a lie, but from the ashes of a hard-won truth. They had lost everything, but in the ruins, they had found something far more valuable. Each other. They were no longer two lonely, desperate people bound by a contract. They were a family, forged in fire and sealed in courage. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and full of promise. The sun was rising, and for the first time in a very long time, it felt like the start of a new day. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the Wild West. It's a story that proves that even in the harshest of circumstances, hope can find a way to grow, and the most unexpected arrangements can lead to the truest love. What did you think of Mary Ellen's decision? Could you have been as brave as she was, facing down outlaws to protect your family? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear what you would have done in her shoes. If you enjoyed this story of survival, courage, and unexpected love, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next thrilling tale. Every click helps these stories reach more people just like you. Until next time, stay safe and remember to look for the light, even when you're surrounded by darkness.